Today I'm at a very special place. I'm actually standing inside the gatehouse of a former medieval abbey known as St Benet's. And I'm just a few short feet from the edge of the River Bure, which is part of the Broadlands district. Now, for many of you that may not be acquainted with this part of the world, this particular area is famous for its boating facilities. There are many canals which interconnect with each other and form part of a matrix which is known as the Norfolk Broads. And in this particular case, where I'm standing, you can quite often see sailing boats quietly gliding past on their way up and down the river or heading into the many myriad of canals that connect to this particular area. The reason that these canals exist is down to our medieval forebears who excavated peat from this area. Once the peat was dug, the water obviously infilled into these empty channels, and gradually over the centuries they form part of an intricate set of waterways, which today is much used by birdies, people that come here to admire the wildlife which exists here, because it is, relatively speaking, unspoilt. The gatehouse that I'm standing in is particularly unusual. I believe it dates from the 14th century, but it's completely encompassed by an 18th century windmill tower made of red brick. One may speculate, why have we got an 18th century tower built into part of a medieval gatehouse? Well, before I can answer those questions, we need to travel back into the distant past. And this particular site was first settled by monks, either in the 7th century or the 9th century. It's a bone of contention amongst many academics as to when these people first arrived and why the site was chosen. I would like to think that the reason they settled here was certainly for the peace and quiet, but also the easy access that this site affords anybody travelling to and from the site. If one goes back into the medieval period, roadways were less common than they are today, and travelling anywhere was an absolute burden. But of course, with a river and a bank very close to where you're actually working and living is an absolute boon, and particularly for trade, and also in the event of the site being attacked perhaps by rogue barons or brigands travelling up the river by boat to lay siege to this particular location. And certainly I believe in 960 the Abbey was attacked by King Cnute, who burnt the buildings to the ground. One can only assume at that period of history they were mostly of wooden construction. Cnute obviously felt bad by his actions and decided to rebuild the abbey dedicated to St Benedict. And as a result of which the monks were spared, and Cnute went on his way, and the abbey continued to thrive and exist here and expanded to cover 98 acres of land during its time. Let's cast the time clock forward to the time of the invasion by William the Conqueror from France. He arrived here shortly after the invasion to discover this monastery, but he could not penetrate its walls. The monks refused to surrender. There was a curtain wall which extended the entire area of the site. It was absolutely immense. It was vast. One can only speculate that the monks must have acquired a tremendous wealth over those centuries. The monks were parleyed by William the Conqueror and asked to surrender. They refused to do so, and so the Normans laid siege to this particular abbey. And as a result, there was a monk, a man by the name of Veritas, who secretly made an arrangement with William the Conqueror to allow them to be able to get into the site area without having to use military force. But the condition of which he asked was that he would be declared the abbot of this particular order and that the monks would be spared. These conditions were readily agreed to by William the Conqueror, and so they took this particular site from the monks. And when, of course, Veritas, the traitor, asked whether or not William was still prepared to stand by his word, and William agreed that he would be the abbot of this particular order. But that only lasted for perhaps a few minutes before he was dragged off and unceremoniously he was hung, drawn and quartered. As a warning, perhaps. I suppose when one looks at things historically, nobody likes traitors, even though the traitors themselves may be particularly useful. Obviously, Veritas wasn't a man who could be trusted, and so William decided to be off with him. The monks here continued to practice all the way through to the dissolution of the monasteries by King Henry VIII. But what was unusual, and very unusual, in fact, unique, he made no order against the monks here. They were allowed to continue as they were. But of course, within a few short years, the monastery was abandoned by the monks, and the site, its land and buildings, was handed over into the charge and care of the Bishop of Norwich. Obviously, at that period of history, the Protestants had no use for a former Catholic site, and one can only assume that the reason the monks left here was that they were not allowed to practice their Catholic rituals. And so, because there was no use for this site, it was allowed to fall into abandonment. In fact, the original church, which once stood across the field, which is still marked by the presence of a cross on the site of the altar, was actually taken apart by the locals, and part of the stone was used to build a manor house, and the rest of it was used to restore the local church here. And no doubt other stone had disappeared further afield, but over a period of time, the entire site had disappeared, apart from the gatehouse. I can say that by the 17th century, the gatehouse existed more or less complete with the top floor and lower floor. But by the time this windmill here was built in the 18th century, the upper floor had completely disappeared. And I think that what had happened, when they actually constructed the windmill, they decided that the top level of the floor of the gatehouse was an encumbrance to the design of the building, and it was taken down. The windmill apparently continued here well into the 19th century before it was abandoned, and all that's left of this relic is the actual tower. And there are still prints in existence, and you can see from here that gives you an impression of what the windmill looked like when it was in use. But what an unusual location to build a windmill. We also know that the building was built during the 18th century simply by looking at a number of the bricked up windows. During the reign of King William III, he was looking for new ways of taxation. They originally had the clock tax, where people had to pay taxes if they owned a clock. And certainly there are certain clocks which are quite collectible today. They're known as Act of Parliament clocks, because the local landlord was able to display one of these clocks inside his pub, which would obviously attract the locals to go there to check the time. Well, obviously, this was a very impractical taxation, and so it was largely abandoned until they introduced the window tax, which existed for 155 years. And so when they built this tower in the 18th century, they intended to let in as much light as possible, but weren't able to pay the window tax. So the shape of the windows still exists, but of course they're bricked up. And of course, during its period of its lifetime, they obviously decided there was no need to open these windows, even after the tax was abandoned, and eventually, of course, the windmill was abandoned. And slowly but surely, this site became treasured amongst people to come as an amenity to enjoy the views that one can see from here, the wildlife, and of course the fresh air. And if you wander around the particular ruin here, you will actually find remnants of graffiti which were placed here over periods of history dating from the 18th century all the way through to the present day. And some of the stone columns are absolutely immersed in graffiti. I am a person of two schools of thought about graffiti. Is graffiti a good thing? Well, obviously not if it's desecrating an original building. But from a historical perspective, graffiti is a good way for us to determine in modern day times social trends during those periods of history when the people left their mark on those stones. So today, the graffiti itself gives historical reference to a lot of things which took place over those periods. The site today is maintained by the Norfolk Archaeological Trust, and it's open 24 hours a day for people to come and visit. Part of the land upon which the original church was built is actually in the middle of cow pasture, so if one comes here, one has to be a little bit careful where they wander for the cow pats. I found my visit here today to be absolutely amazing, to actually see this windmill built inside an original medieval gatehouse is quite unique and quite unheard of. But the two seem to work quite well together, and in a way the brickwork which was created here in the 18th century has helped to protect and preserve the brickwork of the medieval gateway. And what I'm hoping to do here today, later, is to investigate this building when it turns dark and be able to pick up perhaps some ghostly activity from within. And this building, this site, has an amazing history of ghostly happenings, which I wish to share with you now. It's believed that this gateway is haunted by the spirit of Veritas, the traitorous monk. The unfortunate part that I had in my research, there's also reference to another monk who was the alleged betrayer. His name was Esric, but from documents that I've examined, I think that Veritas is probably the monk's name, the guy who offended William so blandly by being a traitor to this particular order. It is claimed that on the anniversary of his death, which was on the 2nd of April, that loud screams can be heard coming from the tower itself, and that witnesses have seen ghostly shades, ghostly forms of monks inside the tower, as a beam is thrust out and then a form which is believed to be Veritas is seen to be hanging from the beam. And this spectre has been seen on a number of occasions across the centuries, and more recently in the 1920s, a captain on one of the boats that frequent this particular part of the River Bure was actually moored up with his crew when they actually saw this spectral visitation appear inside this particular tower. And the whole story unfolded before their very eyes as they saw the monk being taken and being hung from a beam. And this was recorded and passed down over the years along many other tales of people that too have experienced these spectral forms inside this tower. Now, will we be able tonight perhaps to be able to pick up any of this activity, or is it just largely an apocryphal story that's been passed down over the years and of course has no relevance to what had happened here all those centuries ago with the traitorous monk Veritas? But this is something we will find out tonight. There's also a tale from the nearby village of Ludham of the form of a monstrous creature that's been seen roaming across the countryside, causing damage and desecration, and it was believed that this monster hid in a den behind a pub by the name of the Carpenters. Apparently, since the drainage of the marshes had been improved over the years, this particular monstrous form has not been seen since. I think, again, that's probably part legend. If you stand inside this tower and look up on one side, there is a carving, what could appear to be maybe a lion en passant standing up like this, or it could also be that of a dragon. But again, we will never know. The damage which has been caused inside the tower, and particularly so to the remains of the original gatehouse, are quite extensive. And so all we have today is largely a collection of anecdotes which has been passed down to us to be shared, and particularly so for this investigation, which will take place a little bit later when light has fallen. Okay, it's now just on the cusp of utter darkness at this very remote site on Norfolk Broads, and we're certainly looking forward to it. And in fact, as you can see, I brought my friend Eddie.
Hello.
And Eddie, you've been here with me earlier since today. What have you found of the site so far?
It's wonderful, isn't it? Absolutely beautiful place. Came here, see it, and I thought myself, I recognise this place. I've seen so many ghost hunting groups sort of say about this place. And it's sort of like, oh my God, I'm finally here. Because it's one I've always wanted to do. It's really strange. So it's really, really nice.
And we're standing inside a tower, there's no roof, and yet it feels like we're in a room. It doesn't feel like we're standing outside. It feels like we're in a proper building, as it were. But the atmosphere in here, as with everything today, is variable. It's been changing the whole day long. And there's a certain tenseness here that I found earlier. But overall, it feels quite warm and chilled, and something that I'm particularly looking forward to. And I was watching a video a few nights ago of a group of people that came here, I believe, from the north of England, and they carried out a paranormal investigation here using a PSB-7, and they picked up a lot of responses. So I'm hoping that we're going to pick something up too with our PSB-7, and hopefully we might even capture a light anomaly too.
Got to be careful with them light anomalies. There's a lot of nets and that because we're near the river. So we've got to be careful of them.
Yeah, so anything which is small, you know, like itty bitties, which staggers from side to side, is generally a bug of some description. But yeah, we're definitely in bug country, so for any light anomalies to appear, they've got to be substantive. And if you remember when we was at the castle, Baconsford, Eddie left his camera to run in one of 2 rooms in this tower at Baconsford Castle and picked up an amazing light anomaly. So whether tonight we're going to pick something up like this, hopefully.
Do I cross my fingers?
Yeah, hopefully, I say. Hopefully we might be able to pick something up and to share. I certainly, from a historical perspective, find the history of this site incredible. When you think 2 famous people in history came here, William the Conqueror and King Cnute. I mean, what kind of a legend is that, those 2 famous people, and the story of betrayal that afflicted the monks here through brother Veritas, who betrayed them. Are we going to see a recreation of his execution as allegedly described by other witnesses? I personally think it's unlikely, because I always find with the paranormal, if you don't know the stories that are attached to a particular location, they tend to happen, don't they?
You can just hope. You can hope. That's it.
So what we're going to do, we're going to start off first of all
with the paranormal.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And we're going to start off with a ghost box session, and then to turn it off, we'll use the night cams. It's very cold here. I know it's been a really beautifully warm day today, but we are, as I say, we're on open land, exposed to the River Bure and to the Broads. So there is a cold air blowing across, which we can all feel now. In fact, it was so cold earlier, I was wearing gloves. I mean, how crazy is that? But as I say, we're hopeful, and no doubt you two are, that we are going to pick up some very interesting activity at this very remote and ancient gatehouse. And I thank you, Eddie, for joining me on this little excursion.
I'm looking forward to it. I really am. Really looking forward to it.
Let's crack on with, and hopefully you'll see the fruits of our labours.
Friends.
Can you tell me your name, please? My name is Chris, and I'm with Eddie.
What's your name?
I come here in love, light and peace. I'm not a person that will show you disrespect.
What's your name?
Can you tell me your name? Do you know where we are? We have come here to contact those of you that lived on this estate, and particularly so when it was a windmill and the miller during the Georgian period, and also when this site was used by a religious order of Benedictines. Are you here, Brother Veritas?
Yes.
Were you wronged by history? Has history lied about you? Did you betray your brothers here? Or were you a victim of persecution by William the Conqueror?
Did they starve you? Did they starve you?
Yeah.
Did they keep you prisoner here?
This isn't Brother Veritas, this is someone more recent. Brother Veritas would only understand Latin, wouldn't he? Or basic...
That's the thing that I was sure, but it's kind of like trying to get around that.
Who is the man who's with us at the moment, please? Because we're asking. We're asking you. What is your name, please? You said something, I didn't quite hear it.
Is that your name, Bella?
Are there any women here? Yes. Did you hear that? It's a female voice and she said yes. What is your name, please, madam?
Well, lady, is your name Bella? Is that right? You appear angered the way how you were treated.
Are you angry? Yes.
Is there anybody that worked at the mill here?
And who are you, sir?
What's your name, please?
Can you tell me your name, please? Please tell me your name.
So you worked at the mill here, yes?
Does God exist? Do you believe in God? Sort of hesitant, yeah.
That's what I heard.
Are you standing here with us right now, please? Are you here now? I know you're here. Are there any goodly Christian folk here, please? Are there any Protestants? Any Catholics?
There ain't nothing.
There ain't nothing. But there's you. And you're talking to us. Well, if you don't want to talk to us, we can only go away and leave you. Would you like us to do that? Would you like us to leave you? And I promise we'll be good. Would you like us to stay?
You don't want us to leave, do you?
We're getting little bits and pieces, Eddie. It's not anything to write home about, is it?
You got the light out on the camera.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, I don't know what to say, not yet on it. So you can get the sort of bursts, and that's it. But
there's little bits that have come
just
across.
wait
I
and
think
see.
what we should do now is just go for a wander around the tower and see if we can pick anything up amongst the ruins. Okay, I'm just going to wander around outside with the night cam. We're still inside the gate. Can you turn that light, Ed? I'll flash it, get away with it. As you can see here, it's the part of the original curtain walls, which define the curtilage of the 98-acre estate here. Just walking around the tower, and you can hear the wind. Oh, it's cold now, isn't it, Ed?
A wee bit chilly.
Very chilly. Okay, we're still walking around the tower. It's a bit uneven here, so you've got to be careful, Ed. I mean, it's just a shame that we've got the fine flint napping on there.
It's beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah.
It really is. Oh, plane come in.
We can't get through there because it's bricked off. Yeah, there's a lot of aircraft coming in. It's a beautiful archway. Such a beautiful building, such a shame. Flash it right up the tower and just get to the top of the tower and back inside again. Come here in love, light and peace, so wish you no harm, no disrespect, just wish to make friendly and peaceful contact. If there's anybody here who is prepared to speak to us, if you could speak now, please. My name is Chris, as I've said earlier.
I'm Eddie.
And there's my friend Eddie. And it's very cold now, isn't it?
It is.
Really, really cold. It's not every day that you can be sat inside a medieval gatehouse which has a windmill built into it.
I can think of them.
There are so few places that have that, and it's just unbelievable. I'm doubly wrapped now because it's so cold.
Sorry?
I'm double wrapped.
Mm-hmm.
Please, could you give us a sign? Please, could someone say something? Could they touch one of us? Make a noise? Or some other indication, please, of your presence? We make the time, Eddie.
I've no idea. I haven't got a lot. Oh,
Yeah, I've got a light. You liar. Oh, I haven't got a light. I've only got the light you gave me, so it's not a proper light. That's the top of the tower. A little hole in the sky.
It's pretty clear, that is.
And that's the doorway into the mill.
20 past 2.
I think we'll wrap it in 10, don't you?
Mm-hmm. Let's know you're here any way you can.
Just make a noise. Say something.
Ooh, it's a white light that went across there.
What was that, Eddie?
That was a light went across. See it in the corner there. Very quick when I was there.
Yeah, that's what I saw outside through the doorway in the gatehouse entrance.
Come on, let us know you're here.
I'm not sure. I think I saw it just seemed like a billowy grey mass just flashing across past this archway, but I can't be sure. I'm only looking for a viewfinder.
You're so cute.
The trouble is tonight, it's too breezy outside to walk around with the camcorder. It would just destroy the audio. It's pointless. Eddie's hidden his camcorder on a ledge.
So I'm hoping I might get something from outside.
You might do, yeah, if it happens. That would be wonderful. Okay, we've been here now for, as far as night shooting is concerned, for about 2 hours. It's absolutely bitterly cold now. It's hard to imagine that, we're in May. And it's been a really wonderful day today. It's been very bright, very sunny, very warm, just a slight breeze. But because we're on exposed ground, heading back down towards the coast, and of course with water, it always draws across a cold draft of air. And we're starting to feel it here now. It's hard to imagine that how the animals that sleep out in the fields actually keep warm, but they do. But for us, it's getting a little bit too chilly. There's been some interesting interactions on the ghost box. I saw a flash of light drift past the entrance to the actual mill area. But certainly I felt energy, but I've not actually seen anything else. And we had 1 or 2 interesting responses on the ghost box, but it remains to be seen what we've actually got, although of course by now you would have seen what we've actually got.
Well, tonight's certainly been an interesting investigation. It hasn't been anything that has jumped out at you that's created amazing activity that you've been able to pick up. I saw a light form flash past the doorway into the Windmill from the outside gatehouse. I've certainly felt things, but I haven't seen anything else. And the ghost box picked up some interesting responses, which of course at this stage I don't know what we've got there, so I need to review that too. From a historical perspective, it's been absolutely amazing. The interest I have in the architecture of both buildings, the Windmill and the gatehouse, has been fascinating. But like everything else, it has to come to an end. It's absolutely bitterly cold here, and I just can't wait to get back home. It's going to take 2.5 hours. I've got to drop Eddie off in North Suffolk on the Norfolk border. Then I've got to drive down country and travel back to my home in Essex. But what about yourself, Eddie? What have you experienced here tonight?
I can honestly say the most active for me was actually this afternoon, actually before we were about to leave. That was when things was really happening. I could actually hear a dog. So it was not sort of like that. I kept hearing the voices this afternoon.
Did you enjoy that? Bit people listen talking outside, so it's a bit difficult to say which is which. But I should know if you haven't said something. Personally, I'd like to hear you say something to me. Thank you. If that's you, just said something.
But anyway, from me and from Eddie, it's good night, and we'll speak to you again very soon. Yeah?
All the best.
And that was a thumb up.
That was a thumb.
That was a thumb. Thank you.